Welcome to Shaping the New York City Skyline, the podcast that explores the stories behind the buildings that shape our city. I'm your host, Brenda Slokowski, and I'm here with my co-host,
David Shamshovich.
Hey, David.
Hey, Brenda. We have an empty chair over here. Camilla's, unfortunately, so busy with work at Side and Shine PC. That's www.sideandshine.com, SEIDENSCHEIN.com. She's so busy with inclusionary housing. By the way, we have so much work, and also we could use more.
I'll tell you, I was working really late last night.
I was really working really early last night. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We're very busy. Brenda and I are attorneys at Side and Shine. We practice in the inclusionary housing and transactions division.
This is my new favorite button.
We should get like a laugh track too. Do we have a
There's
laugh track?
funky music, something else, the claps, and then the ba-dum-tsh noise.
Oh, great. I like the bottom-ching noise.
It's a good one.
We had a wonderful interview with the principal of Aufgang, formerly Aufgang.
Aufgang, period.
Aufgang, period, yes. Formerly Aufgang Architects, Ariel Aufgang, who we've worked with in some shape or form, at least I have, for the last 8-9 years.
Yeah, me for the last 4.
He's one of the top architecture firms. Now they do more than that in the city. They do engineering, they do consulting.
He created this second arm of his office to be a one-stop shopping where you get both engineering and architectural services from soup to nuts.
And more.
Incredible.
Yeah, and more. And he talks about that in the podcast. He's very young, but he's owned this thing. He's purchased it when he was even younger. He's in his early 40s, early to mid 40s.
He became a managing partner or a manager at the company when he was, what did he say, 28?
Yeah. And he's essentially been there for his entire career, although it was named something different. And then he succeeded, and he's been at one place the entire time. It's interesting to hear when we have guests on who have been at one place the entire time.
To
Jason Dabowski, right?
Jason Dabowski and David McCarty.
And David McCarty.
Yeah.
And also David Marks, he's been at Silverstein for a while, and it sounds like that's the place. These are dedicated people who love their jobs. For all the people out there who transition jobs really quickly and go from one thing to another, these people stick with the same thing because it sounds like they found their passion.
When you find a good workplace, it's hard to leave. I'll tell you that.
That's true. And Ari's actually created an awesome workplace for himself.
Yeah.
He developed his...
He prides himself on it.
Yeah. And he's created an environment where his employees, professionals, they enjoy coming in because of the culture that he's creating.
And the rooftop yoga.
The rooftop yoga is something interesting. I don't know if we can do that here.
Do we even have a rooftop?
The Fight Club is in the basement.
We're not supposed to talk about Fight Club, David.
Oh, is this... is that part of the rule? I thought that was just in the movie.
Oh, my God.
Punch me in the face as hard as you can. Brenda doesn't need an invitation, by the way, to punch me in the face as hard as she can.
Did you not hear the background noise? We're like trying to make it seem like a...
Do you think we have...
that's not a sound effect. Right.
That was good. Maybe we record that.
That was a good one.
And then I'm like, oh. So our interview with Ariel Aufgang, we were very lucky to be able to get him in. He has a very busy schedule. He's really doing the rounds. He has a lot of speaking engagements, not just in New York, all around the country, lots of conferences that he goes to. And he's a great marketer. And he was just a pleasure to talk to. He had such a well of information. And particularly given the types of clients that he has of all walks of life, all throughout in different states as well. He had lots of an interesting perspective, not just on how he manages his workflow, but on housing in general, and housing not just in New York City, but in other parts of the country where he's doing more work.
Totally. And it was so cute to hear that even when he was like 7 years old, his mom was like, yeah, you wanted to be an architect. So cute to hear. Like, who does that anymore?
Yeah. And he didn't actually know whether or not he said that he wanted to be an architect at 7, but he just remembers that his mom told him at 7 that he wanted to be an architect.
You'll hear about it. It's cute.
Yeah.
It's cute.
He's very engaging, very smart, and very business oriented, very savvy. And we had just had a pleasure talking to him.
Without further ado, Ariel Aufgang. Hi, David. How are you?
Hi, Brenda. And hello to all our Skyliners. I say millions, but I think at this point it's about 2 to 3 billion.
Yeah, we're really growing exponentially.
Although my father gave me my first million Skyliners, so doesn't really...
Your legacy.
Doesn't really count. I put it in the bank and it grew interest. Thank you, Fed, for raising that, by the way. We're here with a very special person, somebody we've been trying to get for some time. I think actually I've been thinking about getting you for a long time. I'm not going to say the guest until I do a little bit of an intro. He's from Argentina, and I wanted to say it with that accent because
Are you sure you want to say it with that accent?
Maybe I was going to... He's from Argentina, although he came here when he was 2 years old. And you grew up in the area, you grew up in Suffern.
Right.
Where you still practice. And you're the owner and principal of Aufgang Architects, Ariel Aufgang, and also the recipient of the New York State Empire Award, which you received from New York State Senator Bill Weber.
Ooh.
You're, well, nothing to share.
Sorry. Preemptive clap, sorry.
He went to RPI, and I'm only saying RPI because I don't know how to pronounce the first word.
It's just Rensselaer.
Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, where you got 2 degrees in architecture and building sciences in a 5-year program. That's a lot of school. We only do 3. Lawyers don't do more than that.
I did go to college.
But I wanted to really welcome you and say thank you very much, Ariel, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I know that you have a lot of history behind how you became an architect, and you have a lot of articles that you've published. You've been on podcasts. And I know since 7 years old, at least your mother has told you that you wanted to be an architect. So what is your version of how you came into this business? And maybe I wanted to be an actor at 7 years old. And in some ways, I sort of still am. But what is your story as to how you got to this career?
Well, as a kid, I was always very interested in math and also in art. So my mother decided when I was about 7 years old that I should be an architect, and quickly gaslighted me into thinking that I decided to be an architect. So I stuck with it. And the truth is I'm grateful for that, because having direction during my adolescence, having direction during my early college years really helped to keep me focused. And I think it always gave me a little bit of a leg up on my peers when I graduated, having known exactly what I wanted to be from such a young age. There were negatives to it also. I also missed my 20s, right? I didn't have those 20s when a lot of people sort of went crazy and had fun. During my 20s, I was already working for this company. I was already building the business. And by the time I was 27 or 28, I was already managing the entire practice. So being in my mid-40s now, I feel like a little bit of an old man in the business. And I am. I've been here for, over 25 years. So a lot of experience comes from starting so early.
Well, there's no video on this, but you definitely don't look like an old man. You're only a couple of years older than me, and you probably look 5 or 6 years younger than me. You look very
Thank you, David. Thank you.
And I certainly wasn't anticipating it, only because I've seen pictures of you, but I didn't know how current they were, whether you had some sort of touch-ups done. But
There's some Photoshop
Touch-ups.
going on.
yeah, you know that.
Oh, you meant Photoshop touch-ups. Okay, I thought you meant physical touch-ups.
No. Touch-ups with photos. So you look fantastic. I wouldn't classify you as an old man in any degree.
Yeah.
The
Flattery will get you everywhere. So thank you very much.
which is exactly that. Why?
Oh, so what's next?
Well, there's not going to be any hardball questions.
Okay.
We're all friends here. This is like a conversation. We can almost forget the microphones are even here.
Okay.
I wanted to just pull back a little bit, only because I'm interested in a little bit of your family. What did your mom do? What did your dad do? If you had a dad growing up, I didn't. So I assume there are some people out there who also didn't.
So my parents were married at a very young age. My mother was 19 when they got married. My older sister was born when my mother was only 21. I was born when she was 23. And then a couple of years later, both of my parents and my sister and I moved to America from Argentina. When we moved to America, we certainly grew up lower middle class, working class. Neither of my parents finished college. My father was in the food business. He was always working for food distribution companies or in supermarkets. I've got memories of being a young kid going to supermarkets with him where he'd be setting up displays and I'd be pricing of soup or cans of tomatoes. And my mother, when I was about 7, when my younger sisters were born, I have 2 younger sisters. They're 7 years younger than I am. When I was about 7 years old, my mother was home with them, and our next door neighbor in our apartment in Spring Valley, New York, had to go to work, and she had a newborn baby. And she brought her baby over to my mother's house, to our house, handed the baby to my mom, and said, I have to go to work. You have 2 anyway. Take care of mine also. And she left the kid with my mom. And that was the no, not forever. Not that kid, but kids forever, yes. So my mom then opened up a home daycare. And my mom has been operating a home daycare center ever since, and she still does. She still operates a very small home daycare in Rockland County where I grew up. 6 kids at a time, that's it. She never wanted to bring on help or anything else. And she just has 6 babies, and she has generations of kids that come back to see her, generations of kids that invite her to weddings and everything else. My father and I had a business together until about 3 months ago when he retired. When I built my office building in Suffern, after having moved back to Rockland, I lived in the city for many years, met my wife, moved back to Rockland County. I built an office building for our practice. And on the ground floor, I'd already leased to a restaurant, a sushi restaurant. It's actually very good, Sushi Bada. I had a small space left over, and I didn't want another restaurant. And there are very few things you can put. We live in a sort of a downtown area near a train station, but there's not a lot of retail that could survive. So I saw an episode of Undercover Boss where the undercover boss was a guy from a company called Postnet, which is a shipping and printing franchise business out of Colorado. And I thought, oh, that's a good idea. No rats, no roaches, nice, clean business. And I could be a client with my office upstairs. So I flew to Colorado and I bought a franchise from this company, PostNet. It's a true story. And they said, well, how are you going to run it? You run your architecture business, you run your real estate stuff. And I said, well, my father's going to run it. So they said, well, we have to meet him. So I sent him out there. He met them and he worked the store for 7 years. And then he just retired a couple of months ago. And we sold the store. And the funniest thing, which I didn't even notice, and this is like, you guys know, when we're wrapped up in business and our transactions, you don't really see the forest through the trees sometimes. 7 years later, I wanted someone to buy the business because I wanted them to pay the rent, and my father wanted to retire. I didn't want to deal with running a print shop. I don't have time for that right now. I ended up selling the business and signing a lease with the operator from Undercover Boss. The same guy by the name of Calvin. At the time when he did the episode of Undercover Boss, was almost 10 years ago. I watched that on a rerun.
Wow.
He owned one store in the Bronx. Now he owns 7, 6 in New York, 1 in South Carolina. And I called headquarters. I said, do you know anyone who might want to take over the store? And they said, why don't you call Calvin? I'd spoken to him a couple of times over the years. He came up. He's like, yeah, this is close enough to the Bronx. I can sort of print in the Bronx and deliver in Rockland County. And he bought the store from me.
That's brilliant. And then they're leasing it from you too.
They're leasing, right. So the store didn't have much value. It's a small little shop, but they signed a lease in the building. So now I have a great tenant who has now 8 PostNet stores.
Full circle.
Full circle. I didn't even notice. I honestly didn't even realize it until after we signed the lease. I'm signing the lease and I know it's Calvin, but I know him over the years and years go by. You don't really think about stuff like that. I'm like, that's the guy I saw on TV.
And the whole reason that you went and bought the business in the first place.
Right. Because he seemed so cool and he had those locations and he made it seem like a desirable business.
That's a great story. Have you told that story before? Like in public?
No, we signed this lease like 2 weeks
guys,
ago.
Breaking news right here.
Yeah.
This is the exclusive.
I think it's a really interesting story.
Yeah.
Your sisters, what did they end up doing? Or
So I have an older sister who's an attorney. She's actually general counsel. Shout out, right? She's general counsel at Kaplan, USA.
Oh, really?
So she lives in Washington, D.C. right now.
Kaplan, like tutoring?
Yeah, learning resources, tutoring, study guides, and they also do exams and testing. My younger sisters are both consultants. One lives in Westchester County, and one lives here in Manhattan.
Where in Westchester?
She lives in Eastchester.
I just moved to Westchester, and I'm not exactly sure where Eastchester is, but I know it's east of Westchester.
It's in Westchester. Oh, he doesn't know Chappaqua? Not so far.
It's
not so far.
It's somewhere there. I don't know well enough. I used to live in Williamsburg,
Okay.
in the city for a decade. I grew up in Brooklyn too.
Okay. That's a big change going up to Chappaqua from Williamsburg.
It's a big change, but it's one that's welcome. It's nice to have a little bit of open space.
Right.
You know, although I did love living in Brooklyn. So you eventually end up going to school for architecture.
Yes.
And you're graduating. Are you graduating with a job? I know that the firm that you work at now actually was Hugo Surpassed.
Right. So I interned for Hugo from the time I was 18. So winter break of sophomore year, I interned for Hugo. His office was in Rockland County. We were 6 people at the time. I interned there winters and summers until I finished my 5-year program. Spent about 3 months looking for a job in New York. Realized no one's going to give me as much of an opportunity as the gentleman I've worked for already for over 4 years. Went back, worked for him, and I just never left.
And what kind of stuff were you doing there before you ended up becoming a partner and then finally owning the place?
So he was doing a lot of rehab, still a lot of HPD work. So the work that I was doing was mainly measuring old buildings, doing plans for renovations. At the time, HPD had a program called NEP, Neighborhood Entrepreneurship Program, and they were selling buildings for very affordable prices to small entrepreneurs in Harlem. So we were working for a lot of those guys, joining buildings together, making multifamily buildings out of, 6-story walk-ups. And it was a rough time in Harlem. This is the late 90s, so it's a different Harlem. But I learned a lot during that time about how to work with people in the neighborhood, how to really make sure that the product we're providing serves the people that are going to live there and not just our concepts of what would be right for them.
I think that's an important point, which I will get back to, because I think that's one of the things that you've mentioned a number of times throughout your career. I think it's an important point, but I want to first finish, I guess, this line of thinking, which is how does a firm in Rockland County convince small business owners in Harlem to hire them?
At that time, it was just experience with the agency. So Hugo also had a predecessor that owned the firm before him, a man by the name of Jacques Gerstenfeld, who I never met, but he owned the firm started the firm in the late 70s. I should note that Elise Levine, who's still my office manager to this day, was with him when he started the company.
Wow.
So there was an architect named Jacques, living in one house. The next door neighbor was Elise Levine, who's still our office manager. And the next house was a structural engineer. Forgot his name. Oh, Lenny Jackson. So Lenny Jackson and Jacques both did work, and Elise was the office manager for Jacques. They eventually built a building together that they both moved into for their offices. And that's the building where I first interned for this company. We've moved a couple of times since. And then when I built my office building 9 years ago, I actually partnered with one of the younger partners of Lenny Jackson's office.
I saw that.
So Brian Brooker and I own our building together.
You're a big fan of the full circle.
Full circle. It just happens. It's never on purpose.
He's like a Seinfeld episode. You know how they always
There's right.
You're able to wrap it up. Very few people can do that in their lives, given that most of the things that happen in our lives appear to be random. Maybe they're not.
Well, I think
the Seinfeld theme song here.
all right.
Yeah, I can't do it.
I think it's just because I've always been taught to really learn from other people's mistakes. That was one of Ugo's big sayings was smart people learn from their mistakes, savvy people learn from other people's mistakes. So you see what works and you use what you can you take what you can, learn from it, and then you add, right? That's even been our strategy in how we design buildings. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel every time we design a building. We have 40 years of experience designing buildings. We're going to take those lessons, design a great building, and add to it.
And jumping off from what you just said, which is, it's not unusual, as far as I know, at least, for an architect to then design their own office. And you're, I guess, essentially a developer at this point, although I assume it's just that one building, but maybe you can tell me if it's not. How did that come about instead of you renting a place like a lot of other businesses would do?
Well, I was growing out of our previous office. My lease was expiring, and I wanted to really build something bespoke to our needs. And the only way to really do that is to build ground up. Brian Brooker, who I just mentioned, the engineer, my partner, he owned this property in Suffern for about 10 years. Never built it. He had an office where he was pretty comfortable, always wanted to build it, but it's a 4-story building. He only did 2 floors. It didn't make a lot of sense at the time to build spec 2 floors of office space in the suburbs, right? No one really builds that much spec office space in downtown areas in the suburbs. In the suburbs, really, spec office are office parks, a lot of parking, that sort of thing. This is really downtown between 2 other buildings across the street from the train. So I told him, why don't we partner up and do it together? And that's what we did. It just made a lot of sense to try to do it. We built the entire building. I sometimes give my clients a hard time. We built the entire building in 11 months.
Wow.
So
And that was-
why can't you do it as
Why
fast as
can't
we
they?
do?
That's, we always wondered that. And we did it, I don't want to say in our spare time, but we still both ran our offices. So I would start a morning shift. I'd go to the job site at 7 in the morning. I'd be at the job site from 7 to 9 running the crews. We didn't have a general contractor. We did it ourselves. Borrowed money from the SBA to do it. They didn't allow us to hire a general contractor. I would then work the full day in my office. And in the evening, come back with my son, who at the time was 2 or 3. He would always come in the evening to inspect the work that was done that day. And that's how we did it in 11 months. And this is 9 years ago. It was $110 a square foot furnished. And that was non-combustible construction with an elevator. We really busted our humps to make it happen because it couldn't happen if we were paying retail.
Yeah.
Is cost also the reason that you maybe didn't do it in New York, in one of the 5 boroughs versus?
No, I think, funny, I was just in with Alvin talking about this. We always liked remote work before it was called remote work. It was just called working in a nice place, right? It was just, so I'm in the city all the time. Before COVID, I was coming to the city sometimes twice a day, right? I owned a van. I still own it. I had a van that would run my staff around the city. So they'd leave in the morning. The driver had a schedule of meetings, drop people off, people finish meetings, get in Ubers, go back. So we're in and out of the city. Today, it took me 35 minutes. We're not far. It's from a distance perspective, it's much further than the boroughs, but I think I can get here faster than you can get to Jamaica, Queens, right? So, boroughs, not boroughs, we're just on the other side of the Hudson River. And, all my clients who used to rent houses or still do for 3 months in the Hamptons and talk about how nice it is to sit on the porch, I'd explain to them, well, I have that all year. You only have it for 3 months, right? So we go back and forth all the time anyway, but we have sort of a little bit of peace out in the suburbs, a little bit of a respite from the noise of the city.
What's something specific that you built in your office that you wouldn't have found had you rented it? Like, due to you building your own space, you now have a specific feature of the office that you're like, we wouldn't have had this if we rented.
Which may not be something overt, right? It could be something that we wouldn't necessarily see, but there's more efficiency and.
I don't know if it was so much about efficiency. I think it was more about environment. So we have very high ceilings. We have very open space. Every workstation that each person has in my office in the city would probably be 3 people, right? So we have a full cafeteria, all that sort of stuff. Before people were really talking about doing that stuff, we tried to do it. We tried to have, recreation spaces, a rooftop terrace that I have full access to. When we first moved in, we would do morning yoga once a week on the roof. I'd have an instructor come in. It is a lot of fun. I think, and that's I have just now, last Friday, so we have Yankee tickets, my office. We have 4 tickets to the Yankees. So sorry to everyone listening who I never invited. But we have 4 seats, good seats to the Yankees. We love baseball. We love taking clients and friends to baseball games. The last home game we had was last Friday, and I said, well, what am I going to do with these tickets? The Yankees are terrible. Nobody wanted to go, right? So I thought, well, why not reward the people that commute from the city to Rockland every day? And we have 4 people. We have someone who works for us who commutes every day from East New York, Usman. We have 2 people from Queens, 1 person from Manhattan that decide to wake up every day and trek all the way to Rockland County instead of getting a job somewhere Midtown. And when I ask them on their reviews or when their manager asks them, what is it about the office? It's always just the culture. It's always that they like working with people that like to work, right? And I had an office in the city for a long time with this office. I had an office on West 27th Street, and it was great, right? Great to go for going to happy hour, great for better places to have lunch, better transportation. But it was hard to keep people. People are always looking for jobs, moving around. Out there, if someone likes the office, they just stay, right? I have a husband and wife. I've had 2 sets of husband and wives that have worked for me. One presently and one got divorced. We have 2 married couple, one married couple that met in the office and another one that's engaged. So it's just a different culture. Everyone's not looking to always change. And for me, and I always tell them whenever I sort of do my corny speeches at our events and everything, I'm very honest, right? It's not philanthropy. I do a lot of philanthropy. That's not why we run the office that way. It's selfish. It makes for better work, right? When people are enjoying where they work, where they're more comfortable, where they like the people they're around, the buildings are better, the plans are better, everything is better. So why wouldn't I want that for the office?
That's definitely the truth. I wish that more people had that mindset. I think a lot of people do. But you're right. When you create an atmosphere that's fun and light, you're going to get better work product out of your workers, assuming, of course, you're hiring the right people.
Right. Well, that's a big part of it. So culture, when it becomes more important to the workplace, it becomes more important in the hiring and firing process also. Plus, you need people that understand that work-life balance doesn't mean balancing the quality of their life with the quality of their work. And I think that's a big misconception, particularly now. You might want to balance the quality of your life with the amount of work you do, but the quality of work still has to be top-notch. And it's up to the managers and the principal to make sure that there's enough people to get the work done in the right amount of time. Yeah. Right? I think a lot of architects make that mistake. They will hire as few people as possible and work them to the bone, right? And that's, typically how architects operate.
Well, that's not how I don't know how many people you have in this office. Maybe you can describe that. And then you have multiple other offices.
But we have one other office.
You have one other office.
Right.
For some reason I thought you had more than one, but no. I guess you have one other office.
We're in Tampa. Right.
So is there a reason why, I assume you opened up in Tampa because there's a lot of developments in Florida.
Right.
But how many people are in the different offices, and then how do you manage them? And then I assume you have others that are doing that kind of work. Right. How do you make sure that everybody seems like they're one office versus operating 2? Or maybe you want to separate the 2. I don't know.
No, we're definitely one office. So in New York, we have 51 employees. There's about 4 administrative staff, 2 engineers, a marketing person, a controller, and everyone else is architects. In Tampa, which is really a new office, we just opened the Tampa office about 6 weeks ago. That is 2 people right now. And the goal is to have 6 people by the end of 24. That's really to be geographically closer to the work we're doing in other parts of the country. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, because we're not targeting Tampa specifically. So right now, our Florida work is actually on the East Coast. We have a very big job in Port St. Lucie, looking at some things in Miami and Fort Lauderdale, and we have a very big job in Austin, Texas. The reason why we started growing our staff in Florida was actually a funny story, if I could. During COVID, one of my employees came to me and she said, Ari, I'm moving to Tampa. I said, okay, well, thank you so much for letting me know. How much notice you're going to give me? She said, no. I still want to work for you. I said, I thought about it for a second. We went out for coffee and I thought about it. I'm like, okay, it might work. And I said to her, how do I know I'm not just going to be a placeholder until you find a job in Tampa that you like? And she said to me, that's not going to happen. I said, well, that sounds great. You're very confident. But how do I know that's not going to happen? And she said, because I already tried. So she was very honest with me. So she moved to Tampa and she runs one of our departments and it worked out fine. So she's on teams with her staff in Suffern all day, one screen for the constant video call and the other screen for the work. And now, because she's doing a great job and because the department's growing, we hired another manager in Suffern, and now she's able to grow her team. So now she hired her first employee, and that's actually my first employee ever that I've never met. So for me, that was a bit of a milestone. We had 2 milestones this year. First employee that I never met. I'm going to meet Javier when he comes up for our Christmas party. And for the first time in my life, I hired an employee that was born after I started working at this company.
Oh, really?
And that was a big deal.
Oh, no.
That was boring.
She was born after I started working at this company. So that was a big deal.
Now it really makes you feel like you're old, even though you still look like you're in your 20s.
Thank you.
I don't, I'm going to have to find out what your secret elixir is because I'm going to have to drink some of that.
Tequila.
Tequila, really?
That's right.
Espresso martinis, man. Everybody get
Espresso
on the train.
martinis. Those are good.
I love espresso martinis.
I went to Paris and Ireland, and I'm supposed to be drinking beer in Ireland. Your girl ordered an espresso martini.
That's great. As long as they make it good. Not too much sugar.
It's okay.
It was interesting to see that you had become a partner in the prior firm
Right.
in 2009.
That's right.
And 3 years later, you buy the thing.
That's right. Well, it was a plan.
It was a plan that you had in your head?
No, it was a plan that we had.
Oh, so it was all along where you're going to be the
Right.
successor.
That's right.
And you're going to purchase this.
Not all along. So in order to become a partner, we had to have a plan for succession.
Mhm.
And that was the plan. So Ugo wanted to retire. He spent 3 years helping us transition, making sure we keep all of his clients. And then he left.
What about the others, the other partners?
There were no other partners.
So it was just you. So the succession was you.
That's right.
That's actually,
When you came in as a partner, what was one of the things that you kind of shook up? What was something that you changed about the firm? What was something that you implemented now moving forward, being like, this is my stamp on that?
So I think the first real change was not voluntary. Because I was so young, there were people that left. So our head designer at the time left. A couple of staff architects left. And I don't know if at the time they would have said it was because I became a partner, but I don't think they were happy. So I realized in that moment that really everyone in business is pretty much out for themselves. And I learned that I've got to make sure that whatever I'm doing for my employees, because they're the most important part of the company, it's not the legal counsel, as you guys might think. It's actually the employees are the most important part of the company.
we don't necessarily disagree. We have lots of important employees here.
So I really realized in that moment, I've got to make sure that people are that people are happy where they are, because we lost a few good people in that transition. My former partner, Ugo, he just sort of, brushed it off and we kept going. We hired more people and everything was fine. So there were a few lessons I learned during that transition. And as far as my stamp on the company, really it was a continuity. I think Ugo had a great way of dealing with clients, but every company goes through phases of growth, right? So I listened to probably too many podcasts, like business executives and big business owners and all that sort of
Never
stuff.
listen to too many of those.
Yeah, no,
I do the same, by the way.
I don't watch any TV. I don't read any fiction. This is like what I like is watching documentaries and listening to other people talk about their businesses. And you always hear about the growth phases. And I think a lot of private equity people talk a lot about how you get into the business, the growth cycle, and then the exit, right? Everyone talks about that sort of thing. And small businesses are a lot different. You can't plan in that way, but I've found that you can plan stages of growth almost as if you are a larger corporation, but you have to have a goal in mind. So our goal was always to diversify our work, because we were very, very tied to just New York multifamily. And there is a lot of work when you're doing multifamily in New York, but you don't ever want to be tied to just one sector. And I saw a lot of my competitors make a mistake. A lot of my competition would grow their company doing affordable housing, get into market rate housing, and then turn their nose up on affordable housing. And then market rate housing is much more mercurial, and they would go through financial cycles, and they'd have major issues. So what I wanted to do, to answer your question in a long-winded way, I wanted to get into market rate and luxury housing right away. So we did that. But it was a challenge because I couldn't just take the people that were doing affordable housing and move them over, because I wanted to keep doing the affordable housing work. The way that I think of growing the business, it's always about focusing on your lane as intently as you can, understanding what you're good at and sticking to it and growing your business in that lane. You get to a point, which a lot of people say, it's a cliche, right? Stick to what you know. But you get to a point, hopefully, where that starts to almost run itself. And that's when you have to realize as a manager, okay, I can pull myself out and now let's go into another lane, right? So I had to really solidify the affordable housing business, which we have. And I think we still have a great reputation. I imagine we do have a great, in affordable housing, we get calls all the time.
You definitely do. Yeah,
Thank you.
we work on so many projects with you. We'll get to that.
Thank you. So I wanted to go into market rate housing. So I started chasing projects. I remember I interviewed for a bunch of firms that, you can't be afraid to hear no, like people say. So I started chasing market rate projects, and then I got a couple of great clients, and we started doing a lot of luxury rentals, condominiums, and focused on that. That's probably in like 2010 to 2013. That business grew pretty quickly. I really got into it mainly because people were taking over failed projects from through the '08 crisis. And these were people that I knew or friends of mine knew because they were buying these assets out of bankruptcy. So I would go in and sort of finish the buildings that were sort of failed projects, make them more efficient, use everything we learned in affordable housing to make the market rate housing operate better and be more economical to build. And then take the lessons we learned in the market rate housing as far as making things more beautiful and more user-friendly in a sense, and bring that back to affordable housing. So now we had 2 lanes, and both lanes grew. And then after market rate housing was really chugging along, I decided I wanted to get more into hotels. So I went after hotels, and then the hotel business pretty much dried up in New York, but we have a couple that we completed, and we're looking to get back into that when it comes back.
And one of the I guess it's not a hotel project. I guess since we're talking about this, is the hotel conversion that Slate did from a hotel to a homeless shelter.
In JFK, you mean?
Yeah.
JFK.
You're
Right.
involved in that as well.
Sure. That was a very complicated project. It's ongoing. It's in design right now. That was a project where the size of the rooms kept the building in a bit of limbo because they were big enough to be studio apartments, but they needed cooking equipment. And then if you added cooking equipment to the rooms, you had to vent. We wanted to vent out through the facade of the building. When you added the soffit to encase the venting to the side of the building, that soffit, the way that HPD measures rooms, it made the room too small and it could no longer be a studio apartment. So it was a catch-22, quite literally, where we couldn't figure out how to get apartments out of these hotel rooms. The solution, it's sort of wonky, but the solution was venting through the roof and combining some units and different things, but it's ongoing. So we're very happy to be involved in that project.
Is there any cross-pollination between the hotel work you were doing and is that how that came about? Or is it because Slate, I know, is a long-time client of yours, just as it is for Side and Shine? How did that come about, that work?
That really came more from our experience with homeless shelters and supportive housing. So when David and Martin bought that building, they came to us because they know we have a lot of experience designing supportive housing through the HPD programs.
And I've read at least an article or two that either you wrote or commented on that talked about affordable housing and the differences between developing affordable housing versus market rate, because there are differences. I assume there are differences between developing 100% affordable housing and then mixed income. Can you discuss a little bit about those differences? Yeah.
Every building has a user, and it's funny how we don't really think of buildings as a product necessarily, but they are. So for an architect or a builder, the building is your product. So just as if you're designing a new toothbrush, you have to think about who's going to brush their teeth with it and how are they going to do that. We think about buildings the same exact way. And mixed income buildings, while they're all housing, mixed income buildings versus low income buildings do have different needs and usually depends on the population. So most of our low income buildings have a component of supportive housing with services provided within the building. So that will dictate things like ground floor use, amenity spaces, the types of amenity spaces you want. One building may need traditional amenities like a gym and a business center. Another might need a doctor's office for supportive services for mental health counselors to come in and take appointments. So you have to always understand who's going to use the building. But in general, long-term housing, meaning not temporary shelter, is all very similar because the experience of the person is daily and forever in their mind, right? So no one ever moves into an apartment, or most people don't move into an apartment thinking about when they're going to leave that apartment. You kind of think like, this is my new apartment.
It's like when you get married, right?
Right.
About the next girl, right?
Right, exactly. So that's really the way people experience apartments. And that's something I try to explain to my staff all the time also, because it could be somewhat repetitive to just design apartment buildings. And now we're doing other things, but there was a time when all we did was apartment buildings. But what's more gratifying than designing the experience of that person or that family that they're going to have all day, every day? Shouldn't that be considered more gratifying than a museum where someone walks through for an hour and a half? or an airport where they're literally trying to get out of it, right? Everyone thinks airports are so cool. It's the building where everyone's trying to leave the airport.
It's like an IKEA.
Exactly, right. So why is that considered more interesting architecture than a building where someone is going to sit with their spouse and decide to have children? But that's more interesting to me than some building where someone's or a courthouse that's always like considered like the holy grail, designing courthouses for the government. Like, nobody wants to walk into a courthouse. So why is that so great? I'd rather design apartments for people.
That mentality sounds like it helped you when you transitioned into designing for senior living and living in place for long term. Like,
right.
That mentality of, I want to provide a home for somebody who's going to be there forever. Let's make sure that it's accessible for as somebody ages in place.
Absolutely. I think comfort, over the years, we've established office standards that have then become standards in the industry over time. So for instance, our first real floodplain building we did was on Beach Channel Drive in the Rockaways. Senior building in the floodplain for the Arca Company.
We actually helped you with that project.
Right, I remember. Design and design were the project.
We got a
shout out. So when we were designing the resiliency measures in that building, there weren't a lot of rules published yet for resiliency in the building code or in the zoning code. And we decided on our own, every apartment should have one outlet connected to the generator, right? So the code at the time required building services to be connected to the generator, heating system, elevator, that sort of thing. We said, well, if you're aging in place or you're someone who's frail or elderly, you may have things that need to be refrigerated no matter what, right? I'm a type 1 diabetic. My insulin needs to be in the refrigerator. Yeah. So why not give every single apartment one red outlet that's connected to the generator? Now someone can plug in either if they have an oxygen machine or if they have a refrigerator they need all the time, or even just a light, right? So instead of only powering up the public spaces in the building, we also did things like take a community room and make sure that the air conditioning was on the generator. In affordable housing, nobody puts air conditioning on the generator. It's the last thing you think of. People still build affordable housing without air conditioning. We said, no, you can have a long-term flood where someone's stuck in this building for 3 days while they're waiting for the water to recede in the Rockaways, and they're stuck in 100-degree humid temperatures. There should be a room on each floor with air conditioning. So that's what we did. So we put those measures in the building. And sometimes you really see the result immediately. So we renovated a building in Staten Island on, I think it was Bay Street, if I'm not mistaken, for the Arkers years ago. And I walked the building with Saul and Alex, and we walked the boiler room. It was the 3-story building, sort of garden apartment style building. We walked the boiler room, and about 8 inches off the ground, there was a white line on the wall all the way around. And the super was walking with us. And I asked the super in Spanish, because he wasn't going to be honest with me in English, with a big group of guys in suits walking with us. I said to him, does this room flood? And he told me, oh yeah. He said, oh yeah, this room floods. Right, this room floods all the time. And he said, right up to that line.
How does O go in Spanish? Is it O also?
I think it is. I don't know exactly what he said, but yeah, he was adamant. The room floods all the time. And the report from the seller and the seller's real estate consultant, whoever it was, did not mention flooding of the boiler room.
I mean, if you see a line that's like a water line.
Exactly. It was clear as day.
It's like a swimming pool.
Exactly. So then we took all the equipment. We were replacing all the boilers in that building. We took all the boilers and all the electrical equipment, and we put it up on what we call steel done. It's just like steel beams, platforms, just to get it out of that floodplain. It wasn't required because the building, I don't even know if it was actually in a floodplain, but I knew that room was flooding. When Hurricane Sandy hit, and I don't want to seem like all altruistic or anything, but
you should.
So when Hurricane Sandy hit, that building was triaged for the Red Cross because it was the only one that still had heat.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So the Arkers gave that building to the Red Cross. They used the whole lobby and everything, and they actually used that area because the equipment was out of the floodplain. So sometimes you have to go above and beyond code and do what you feel is right and what you think is right, and then you see that come to fruition at times.
I think those are 3 great examples that you just came up with. I'm just thinking between all the things that you have to deal with as architects, just so many things. How do you keep those things in mind? And I know it's not necessarily you, it's your designers, your engineers. Mm-hmm. How do you make sure that you're doing those things, you're dotting every I, crossing every T, and making those efficient determinations?
I think that the first thing you have to recognize is that no set of plans will ever be perfect, right? So I love when contractors start blaming the architect, and it happens all the time. You guys can imagine. I mean, I'm never surprised.
Wrong.
I'm never surprised when they blame the architect. I'm only surprised when they think they came up with that excuse, right? Because everyone before them also had the same excuse. So I always tell them the same thing. Look, there's no perfect set of plans. There just isn't. You can give me a set of plans from any international firm and there's always things you could find. It's absolutely impossible to make a set of plans perfect. What you have to be confident in is your ability to solve problems when they come up, not if they come up. Right? So when they come up, you have to know that you could solve the problem. Once you, in my case, my staff, when we operate with that confidence that we know we have the experience and not just experience, the experience and also the education, right? Every single person in my office that I've hired for the past 15 years is an aspiring architect that's working towards getting a license or a licensed architect. So I haven't hired draftsmen in a very long time because I saw the way the business was going. So with the way that we draw buildings, we draw them in 3D, everything is in the computer. I don't need people drafting. I need people thinking. So every architect is aspiring to be a licensed professional and studying towards that goal. And the act of studying for the exam makes them better architects. And I explain that to them all the time. I don't even care if they ever get the license. It doesn't matter. I'm the only one that stamps drawings in my office anyway. But I want them to try to get a license, because that makes them better architects. So when you walk into a meeting and you know they're going to come at you with something, and they always do, you have to know that you're going to be able to solve it. And you will, right? And you'll be able to solve it. And with that knowledge, you see problems all the time, you solve problems, and you take those lessons learned, you put them in the next set of plans, right? So then that's all you can do is keep building and building and make sure that every building is better than the last one. And I think, I don't know who else you've had, well, I do know who else you've had on this podcast, but I don't know who else you will have in the future on the podcast, but that's not typical of architects, right? It's not typical to think of your work that way. A lot of architects really consider their work to be something that has to be perfect. And when someone points something out that isn't correct, they get very defensive. And that's just not the way my office operates or ever will operate. We're humble. We understand that nobody's perfect. We do the best we can. We do a very good job, as evidenced by our breadth of clients and our time in the business. But if there's a problem, we're going to solve it.
Yes. It reminds me a lot about contractual work, the transactional work that we do. Same thing. Everybody wants a quote unquote bulletproof contract, which doesn't exist. That's a unicorn. It's a fallacy. I do the same thing that you do. And so does Brenda, and so does Camilla, who's not here. We're building upon our prior knowledge, prior experiences, litigations that have happened, cases, other instances, and then building a better contract. And then the next contract's going to be better than that one, and so on and so forth. And you just build on that knowledge. And I think that's a very key. We have to be licensed.
We are nothing if not flexible.
Right.
But we grow on our experience and our transactional, inclusionary housing included, because inclusionary housing, it's so much experience. Yeah, it's evolving and moves like a target.
Right.
Depending on the people that are in charge, depending on the policies, depending on who's mayor. And we have to adapt to those things and constantly change and make them better, and hopefully add to those policies as well. So
the same thing goes with architecture. Even the building codes are black and white, right? Ask me how many square feet you need for parking. I'm going to ask you what borough are you in, right? It's all the same code, but there's different rules in Brooklyn for how you calculate attended parking than there are in Manhattan.
Yep.
So you just have to have that experience. No one knows everything, and we're all just, learning from our mistakes.
So just to turn on a topic that is near and dear to all of our hearts at this table, which is something we discussed, which is affordable housing, the housing crisis, the affordable housing crisis, whatever maybe you want to put it on.
This will be the last thing you discuss.
No, I think
No.
we could probably discuss it for the rest of the time, but maybe we won't. We'll see. You had written an article, an op-ed that talked about, the name of the article is To Solve Our Housing Crisis, Look to Florida. And it was published in Crain's just this August. That's why I wanted to point it out. I never heard of the Florida's Live Local Act, but I may not necessarily agree with all of Florida's policies, but
Right, which by the way was why I made a point of putting that in the op-ed. We all are so quick to think of other states. I don't know. I think this is a lesson that, and maybe I'll let you finish your question. I'm sorry.
No, I think you jumped in at the right time, and I'm me and you are the exact plan. I know how you're going to answer or what you're thinking.
Right.
About.
So when I first started doing work in Texas, and I met these guys who are my clients in Texas, doing a big commercial job down there. It's exotic car storage, commercial, restaurants, shopping mall, that sort of thing. I quickly realized that just because they're not in a suit with an office on Madison Avenue doesn't mean that they're not smart developers. These are some of the smartest people I've ever met in my life, but they go out for barbecue in shorts in the middle of the day. And I love it. And I go to Texas anytime. I'm going to Texas twice in the next 4 weeks. I love Texas. My travel schedule the next few weeks is twice in Texas, twice in Florida, and once in Puerto Rico for Somos. We should all go to. And that's over the next 7 weeks. I love working in Texas. They're down-to-earth people. Really, my clients at least are very, very smart. No pretension. I had one experience where out for barbecue, sitting on sort of a cliff at a picnic table. Guy orders tons of food. Me and my employees don't know what to do because we're so used to ordering like a Cobb salad. This guy's ordering platters of beef ribs and just stuffing his face. And then he took home the leftovers. It was all these things I'd never seen at a business meeting in my entire life. And it was great. And I realized that intelligence in development, intelligence in policy comes in all different shapes and sizes and geographies. It's not just us up here in New York that can come up with good ideas. And I think it is important to look to other states. So Florida's rules are interesting, right? They came up with an innovative way of trying to curtail a little bit of local NIMBYism. On the way here, actually, I was reading, getting ready for a conference I'm going to in Dallas. I was reading about the recent changes in Montana, state legislation in Montana that they think they're going to solve their housing crisis. They really do. Right from the top, from the governor's office and from the state legislature, they've eliminated single-family zoning. Full stop. They just got rid of it.
So everything has to be multifamily? You can't
No, not multifamily. It's not single family. So even the least dense zones permit 2 families in one house, right? Try to come up with a quicker way to make affordable housing.
Right. That's just a blanket, you can build more housing. That's
it. There's no quicker way to build affordable housing than saying everyone's allowed to have what is commonly known as an ADU, an accessory dwelling unit on their property, right? We just completed an RFP, which I don't think I could talk about our submission because it's still being judged in a Hudson Valley town where they're looking at the possibility of letting people put ADUs in their backyards. Small dwellings. The nearest sort of analogy in the city is basement apartments, right?
Yeah.
They
were talking about legalizing.
They were. Now, I'd like to make sure that they're safe before we do that. But yes, so there's no quicker way in a state like Montana or in a Hudson Valley town to build affordable housing units than to just let everyone who owns a house have a second unit. Right? Potential for 100% growth of your housing stock right away, as opposed to 1% growth, 1.5%, sometimes negative in New York City. Right? So it's amazing. So Montana did it right from the top. And I was reading all these articles about it. And I think the reason why it was politically possible, it's not a liberal state, right? These are policies that like every liberal politician in New York would love to own. Montana. It's because the entire state was being priced out of the state. Right? So when you're in a state where the money is coming from California and from New York in some cases, from Florida, from Colorado, the money's coming from all over the country, buying up ranches, buying up houses, buying up apartments. Suddenly you're at the end of your rope as far as affordability because no one in the state can afford a house anymore. So that made it politically possible to pass this law.
That sounds like a terrible place to be, to finally come to a resolution where the entire state can't afford to live there, and so they have no choice but to pass laws.
No, you're right. It sounds terrible, but I think they have vision. They figured it out, right? They didn't
learn from their mistakes, you think?
I think we should.
Too little, too late. Like you now have half the population who can't afford to live there.
Right. Even a state like Texas, 30% of the population is spending more than, I want to get it right, I don't have my notes with me, but I think it's 30% is spending more than 30% of their income on housing. Right? That's something that used to be just New York City.
Yeah. But it's happening all over the place.
It's happening all over the country. So you need big, sweeping changes. I'm on the board of Habitat for Humanity in Rockland County, and it's a great board. It's a great organization. The business model of Habitat around the country has to change because they used to do things like get pieces of property at auction, right? Get special tax consideration to build houses and sell the houses very affordably to someone who's helping to build the house. That's Habitat, right? That's what you think of, people swinging hammers on cheap land. Name one place where a property goes to auction in this area and there aren't 10 developers at the auction.
And that's
not a thing.
Yeah.
It's not a thing.
Not in the city.
So how's Habitat supposed to find property now? Not even in the suburbs. It doesn't exist. Every auction is overloaded with developers who want to build houses or build housing, depending on where you are. So the model has to change. It has to be legislatively focused. It has to be things like inclusionary housing, which New Jersey has. Right now it's by mandate, but inclusionary housing is required, or low-income housing is required in every single new housing project in New Jersey.
So in this article, you talked about what Florida is doing right, and it's not really even necessarily important to say specifically what they're doing. They're incentivizing developers to provide more housing and to build more affordable housing, which is
Right.
very, very much important.
But they're doing it from zoning. So what they're doing that's interesting is they're saying any commercial area, you're automatically allowed to build multifamily to the density of the nearest multifamily district, I think is the rule.
I think it's within a mile. Was it within the mile of the construction they can also build? I forget what it was. I'm looking at it.
Right. So the point is to curtail the red tape. So if you're at a shopping mall in Florida and your shopping mall is out of business, you shouldn't have to go through a 3-year land use process to rezone to build a 4-story apartment building.
Because everybody and their mother has to give an opinion about your building.
And everyone doesn't want it.
Everybody doesn't want it. Anybody that it's going to affect at all.
Right.
Just doesn't want it.
I learned that very, very early on in my career. I was probably 20 or 21 years old, presenting a project in Board 10 in Central Harlem. And we were doing a rehab of a 6-story walk-up. The project before me was some pie-in-the-sky Harlem job where some high-rise with, 10 poster boards of glossy renderings and guys in suits. And I was there, I was a kid by myself, actually. They presented their project, and a lady stands up in the audience and asks a question. And she says, I think if you put that big tower there, it's going to block the wind to the backyard behind my townhouse, and my laundry's not going to dry. I swear. And the entire room stood up and started yelling, her laundry's not going to dry. And those fancy lawyers, packed up their stuff and left.
Yeah.
That project never happened. What are you going to do?
Were there chants afterward? I'm just saying, dry the laundry.
Laundry.
Dry it up.
So I learned, and I was a kid, I guess, maybe not even 20. I might have been 19 years old, 19 or 20. And I learned at that moment, it doesn't matter how glossy those renderings are. It doesn't matter how educated that developer and his lawyers are. If there's someone in the audience who has a real objection that people can relate to, you've got a problem on your hands, right? And so what we're seeing now, in some way, thinking about it now, actually, for the first time, we're kind of seeing the result of all that. The lack of housing being built in New York City, right? The lack of housing being built, the fact that we're not even keeping up with population, the fact that housing is getting more and more expensive and politicians don't even seem to understand simple supply and demand. I was at a public hearing for a Hudson Valley job a few weeks ago, 82 apartments on a main road in a neighborhood that's mainly single-family homes. And 100 people showed up against the project. And there was voting that day. I think it was school board voting. And walking into this sort of country building, all of you in the city would think it was, country bumpkins. So
I live in Westchester. So
oh, you live in Westchester. Right.
At this point.
It's exactly. It could have been the building. Could have been Westchester.
She grew up in Long Island. She's a country bumpkin.
So there was a sign outside that said "Vote here today," and it was school board voting for the school board members. I walked in the building. There was a long hallway that went in either direction. To the left was an empty room. To the right was a line of people coming out of a room. And I thought, well, that must be the voting, right? So I went the other way to go to my public hearing.
You were dead wrong, weren't you?
I was dead wrong. I walked to what I thought was the public hearing, and I walked in, and sure enough, it was voting. Not one person there. 100 people plus showed up against an 80-unit project on the side of a main road in a suburb.
And more than one per unit.
More than one per unit, right. And one at a time, they said variations of the same thing. And I can paraphrase it like this, and you're going to think it's hilarious.
Correct.
They said things like, this area has gotten so expensive, my son can't even buy a house or live here, and you want to build more housing? Okay? Everyone said the same thing. Some variation of that.
I wish people understood economics.
I mean, the irony was totally lost on them. And obviously, I couldn't sit there laughing because I had to answer. So, but what do you do with that? What do you do with that? With people who even those suffering from the housing crisis, where their own kids can't stay close to them because it got too expensive, don't want more housing. It doesn't even cross their mind that maybe their son could live in one of these apartments until they can afford to buy a house.
I think one of the big things that we talk about on the podcast, one of which you hit, which is the stereotype, right? Not everything is as it seems to be. The second thing is the education. And it's a lot of people either are not educated and don't understand how this stuff works, or they choose to be completely ignorant about it. And I think it's a big problem. It's one of the reasons why we're having the issues today. Either the politicians are being ignorant, or their constituents are, and guess who elects them?
That's right.
So that's what they're pandering to. I think it's a problem. I don't know how to solve it, but
We're trying to on this podcast.
I think education's important. Letting people understand that more housing production is vital. I think examples like my somewhat irreverent Florida example in Cranes, which, by the way, I wrote and I only released it to the Florida media, and it got picked up by Cranes in New York. I think we have to point these things out. People have to understand that we think we're so smart up here and we've got the problem worse than anybody else. So what kind of a job are we doing? And I want to add a third thing to your two examples. I think that there's a syndrome in this country of pulling the ladder up behind you. And it's not just as it relates to housing. It's as it relates to immigration. It's as it relates to education, to all sorts of things. People want to get on the boat, talk about how great the boat is, and then pull the ladder up behind them instead of leaving it down. And that's a real problem. And that's something that people don't realize until you point it out to them, right? I know people talk a lot about we're a country of immigrants, right? We literally are a country of immigrants, right? So the attitude towards immigrants now, that could have been the attitude towards your grandparent or your great-grandparent, right? The attitude towards housing now, right? In this neighborhood where I was in the Hudson Valley, it's like a joke. I could sit up there and do a lecture about how ridiculous their argument was because they all live in subdivisions that when those subdivisions were filed and built in the 80s and 90s, the rural residents of that same exact town were out at that same exact meeting, probably in the same exact room, without air conditioning back then also, complaining about the density of the subdivision. And now they live there with their kids for 20 or 30 years. Maybe they're the second homeowner instead of the first, right? Maybe the house turned over once in the interim. And now they're like, no, don't build apartments that someone else can afford. And they're saying things like, when my family came here from the Bronx, it's always the same thing. When my family came here from the Bronx, we came out here because it was quiet and because we liked the peace. And then, okay, well, what about people who want to move here from the Bronx now?
Well, screw those guys.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a big point. I've heard this discussed a few times, but not nearly as much, which is this subset of NIMBYism, which is we've gotten through the door. No, we don't care about the rest of you. And I think the immigration example is the same thing, where there's a lot of immigrants who come to this country and they're all Republicans. And you say, well, I don't get it. You're an immigrant. Why all the policies don't make sense? They're essentially anti-immigration because we had it so hard coming into this country. We don't want those guys to have it easy.
Right.
It's the same thing. Like, we got this affordable housing. We got this housing. Why should they have it so easy? And every generation has, I think maybe the Native Americans are going to rise at some point and be like, actually, the only ones that have a real gripe about this whole thing are the original. And I bet you there was somebody before that. We just don't. Yeah. We just don't know.
Right. Possibly.
So I think it's an important point that you bring up, and some of these ridiculous things, although you're bringing up to make a point, are correct. The education is not there, and I think that's the reason why things are going the way they're going.
Right. So we definitely appreciate you coming and educating the public.
Yeah. The next thing I wanted to turn to is an interesting project that I hadn't heard about previously, but I saw an article about it called the Brownsville Art Center and Apartments. When I was in Brooklyn Law School, which is where I graduated, I did a clinic that was similar to, I think, some of the proposals here, which is a not-for-profit cultural and art center. Every floor would have, or maybe one or two not-for-profits, and it would be like a cornerstone of that neighborhood. This actually incorporates residential. I think it's affordable housing.
That's right. It's all affordable housing.
How did that come about? I think it's still in the works, right? It's not.
Yeah, it's recently certified for rezoning, so it's still in the ULURP process. So I'm not exactly sure what details I can talk about, but I could tell you it was an HPD RFP a few years ago, and our submission included a suite of not-for-profits focused on performing arts. So dance studios, a theater. I think at the time there was a visual arts component that is not there anymore. So that's the base of the building, and upstairs is all affordable housing. It's going to be a great project. The project's being built all prefab. So prefab wall panels will be delivered to the site with windows installed. They'll be topped with precast plank, and then you put the next level on. So it's all sort of assembled off-site and then put back together on-site.
Does that make it a little bit less costly?
It makes it quicker. So yeah, it's pretty cool. We're doing a lot of prefab construction now. We are still waiting for what's called unit prefab. So in other words, we're still waiting for unitized prefab, meaning actual rooms being constructed off-site and being dropped on-site, to become more efficient in the way that they're finished before we really employ it as an office frequently. So it's an interesting construction system, but I've found over the years of having done them that finishing the building can sometimes end up taking just as long as if you did a traditionally built building, because the units built off-site have to be so perfectly manufactured to fit together well that it's almost beyond the possibility of construction tolerance. So you end up spending a lot of time finishing the building once it's there. So we're looking at different ways of doing prefab without having to build entire units or rooms or unitized prefab units offsite. So things like prefab walls, prefab kitchens and bathrooms. So you end up with a little bit more tolerance in the constructability. I know there's a little bit, wonky or esoteric.
No, this is actually very,
but
I think it's very on top.
So prefab units, which everybody loves, and we have done it and it can work very well. Just to restate, see if I can do it a little more concise way. It takes a lot of work to stitch it all together on site because each unit has to really be perfectly built. But if you could bring wall panels, floor panels, bathrooms, and kitchens to a site and put them together like a jigsaw puzzle, now you have more tolerance and you're able to finish the building up a little more quickly, is our experience. So that's a building that's working with prefab systems.
How does the architect get involved? I would think that's more the construction side. So you design what the prefabrication would be and then how to assemble it?
That's right. So that job has a client that's very, very involved and very intelligent in all these matters, and he's a builder. So they're more involved. Other jobs we're doing where we're employing prefab, we have a lot more involvement in dealing with construction logistics. We do build also, right? So I built my office building, as I said before. We do some construction outside of the city on our own. So we have some owners reps in our office, construction managers. So we like to be involved in how things are built and not just what they look like when they're done. And I find that being involved in how they're built makes you a better designer. And as you become a better designer, you can become a better builder. So we really do believe in being very involved in construction. And part of that is dealing with prefab systems and seeing how we could speed up on-site construction by doing more of it off-site. Again, not really saving money yet, but saving time. So while you're digging your foundation and pouring the concrete for the foundation, you could be assembling the first, second, third, and fourth floors in some factory in Pennsylvania, and then bringing it to the site and very quickly erecting the building, as opposed to pouring concrete or laying block or doing framing.
I think it's a very important point you're bringing up. I read a lot about this kind of stuff, nothing that's concrete for me, but the speed is very important because if you're in a crisis in housing, then getting it built very quickly, right, particularly when we don't have anything being filed right now in New York City, non-multifamily, given the end of 421A. When things come back, and eventually they will, I don't know how bad they will be when they come back. When they do, speed is going to be of utmost importance.
Right.
Is that your thinking, that it's going to be very important to get these things done quickly?
Not only quickly, but I think that the quality can be a little bit better. So we're building a building right now up in Sherman Creek in Inwood for Joy Construction and Mad Equities, where all the exterior wall panels are being built in a factory in Pennsylvania. So if someone's building the framing for a wall in a climate-controlled warehouse, right, without a hard hat on, without the need for heavy equipment, just on a table building a wall and installing a window, almost like you're building a piece of furniture, and then it gets put on a truck and shipped to Upper Manhattan, the quality of that wall is going to be a lot better than if someone's hanging off the side of a 30-story building trying to install the facade, right? You can imagine the hazard situation, weather, wind, all those sorts of things, lighting, working at night, all those things are taken care of in a factory. You've got lights, you've got heat, and you've got a controlled environment. So that's one of the main reasons. Speed does help when you're trying to produce housing. But I think that New York it's a strange place, right? As we need more housing, it seems to be taking longer. It's very odd. Yeah. Everything takes longer than it used to. Everything's more expensive than it used to. Everybody wants to say that we're trying to motivate builders to build and all these agencies are going to help us. And the agencies are staffed with wonderful people, but it just seems that it just takes longer. Every job we do takes longer and longer and longer.
I think one of the reasons is, at least, that they're also, the agencies, whether it's DOB, HPD, or others around lenders, others involved in this process, just like you and I are building on our knowledge, they're building on their knowledge and mistakes, which is creating more regulation, which is then creating more cost. It's a problem. I don't know. And your philosophy of doing construction and design, I think, is brilliant, because I always think, how does somebody design when they've never built? How do they build? To me, it was mind-boggling when I learned this, whatever it was. And I'm like, you tell me one person draws it, the other person builds it, and they don't really cross that much. I guess you guys go to the site.
I tease my contractors that the only reason general contractors exist is because architects are too expensive. And it's a joke because they're a lot more expensive than we are. But I mean, who else would you want building your building besides for an architect and engineer? If you can get the actual architect on site all day, the engineer that designed the mechanical system, the engineer that designed the structural system, if they were actually on the job site all day, it would go pretty smooth, right? you can't do that. The business model doesn't work. But, we try to do as much of it as we can. And I think we do it with smaller projects. So that's why you asked me what I'm doing outside of the city early on at development. I don't do any development in the city. I don't compete with my clients. I think that that's their business, and I think they do a great job at it. But during COVID, I did buy land, and I'm building with a partner. We're building houses. We're building homes for first-time home buyers in Orange County, 96 of them. And that's been a great experience for us. The project's called Airy Preserve, airypreserve.com, to see available homes. And
Who's Airy?
I would say it's not Ari. It's funny. I hired a company to do marketing and to come up with the brand, and they went through a lot of options. And Airy actually means the nest of a large bird.
Oh.
So it's AERIE. So Airy Preserve, and then we named the house models after things like nest and haven. So there's a theme to the project.
Yeah.
So we had a lot of fun with that, and it's going great. We've built and sold upwards of 35 homes. Been there for about 2 years. We have about another 2 to 3 years of work to do to finish the community, but that's been great. It's been very gratifying, similar to putting people into new housing, taking them out of substandard housing. It's almost all because of interest rates, and it's sort of a nuanced reason. It's almost all first-time home buyers because nobody is selling their home where their mortgage is 3% to get into a house where their mortgage will be 6 or 7%. Yeah. So every single one of our buyers, upwards of 35 homes, is from either Lower Westchester County, Queens, or Brooklyn. And they're all leaving and going to buy homes in Orange County, about an hour outside of the city. And it's been a great experience. But again, it's a construction experience, right? I have a partner who's a home builder, but we're doing all the site logistics, the marketing, the design of all the homes, site planning, and that sort of thing. And it's been a lot of fun.
It sounds like a very interesting thing, and I like the thematic element of it. I feel like architecture has become more, this is something that we discussed with Jason Tabowski on the last episode, the episode that he did, which is these names of these buildings. And, you want to say, well, I live in the Edge, or I live in the Platinum, or I live in this building, and it's a branding and it's a marketing and it's a way to sell things. I think it's
right.
It's great that you're able to capitalize on those things and build things, I was saying just spare time, but it's not even a side hustle. It's just a part of the business.
Oh, it's part of the business. Absolutely. Yeah. And that's very important to me is whatever we're doing, I've got associate principals that have their own clients, their own projects they bring in. Everything is part of the business. And that's one of the reasons why we rebranded from Aufgang Architects to just Aufgang, right? So we did a logo thing, a whole thing last year. It's just Aufgang with a period, right? Because it's Aufgang, it's whatever you need, right? It's not just architects. We have consulting now. We have construction. We have owner's representation. We have civil engineering. We have site planning. So that's what keeps it fun, right? And we have to keep adding more sides to the business that AI can't take over, and consulting.
We're doing
that is very, very important. Not only are you designing, but you're also constructing along New York City skyline.
And that's what helps Ari shape the New York skyline. We have to introduce that element in every episode, not because we have to, but because we want to.
It's my thing to say the podcast in the podcast.
So you're the segue expert.
Yeah.
I have one more thing that I wanted to get into, which is it really flows from what you were saying just now, and then we can
we'll wrap up.
Then we can wrap up, which is then you started an energy efficiency division or group in March of 2022. It was a little bit over a year ago.
That's right.
Clearly, it makes sense why you did that because of what's happening, but I want to hear it. How did it come about? How did you put it together? Why now? I guess I kind of know why now. But...
Right. So we call it our Building Systems Advisory Unit, because we want to keep it simple. So the BSAU, and that was a joke.
Or the Bazaar.
Or the Bazaar. Oh, the Bazaar. Don't do that. The Bazaar. So
wait, what was the joke? Did I miss it?
No, but it's not simple. Building systems
is that
not simple. It's not so simple. So we're doing consulting for clients. We're actually about to release a press release now. A client of mine bought an enormous building in Hunts Point that was supposedly constructed already. It was an old warehouse that someone had converted into offices. Building went into financial hardship, went into bankruptcy. A client of mine bought it from the bank, and it was supposedly completed according to the plans. So he told me, send your guys, go through this building. So we gave the plans to my engineers. I have 2 engineers, fantastic. We don't do design. We don't engineer buildings. We don't do design documents for buildings. We do things like this. We do reporting, energy efficiency applications for grants and all that sort of stuff. But this was our first real job out of that unit. They went into the building. The building, I think, cost over $100 million to buy. Spent a couple of days there comparing the plans, the quote-unquote as-built plans to the as-built condition. and we found $7 million of missing equipment or plumbing. And our client,
It's like you can't see me right now, but my eyes are rolling back in my head.
right. So our client saved $7 million. We published the report. It was a few hundred pages with photographs explaining what's missing and where, on which floor, what corner of the building, what remediation is needed because they haven't been there for a year and a pipe burst in some closet. A piece of equipment was either never there or was stolen in the time that the building went into bankruptcy. And he saved $7 million. So that's when I realized that, this is a real service. People, like real estate people in New York, we always operate so quickly, right? We don't take the time to really check things as carefully as we should. And this saved my client a lot of money. So we've been doing it ever since. So now we'll do things like peer review on plans. If our clients have a set of plans done by a different engineer and they think, oh, this looks a little bit expensive, my unit will look at it. And it's really the sort of pragmatism of the engineering mind that helps find these things, right? When you're the design engineer, every design engineer whose plans we review obviously is smart enough and capable enough to find these same things, but they're in it, right? They're in the forest.
There's a difference. Yeah. It's a difference when you're looking out and seeing somebody else's work versus being involved.
Right. So giving it to someone else to take a step back to review is a big deal. And I've seen over the years, and I don't want to get myself in trouble with any big fancy companies in New York, but over the years, real estate companies have really sort of taken over this business, right? Brokerages have become the consultants that people call for this sort of thing. But don't you really want engineers and architects, right? Don't you really want to sit with construction? Don't you want licensed engineers going through these buildings, right? So a lot of these real estate companies and real estate consulting companies that serve an incredible purpose when it comes to evaluating assets might not be the right group when you want to figure out that something's piped incorrectly in the boiler room, right? So there's a niche that we're trying to fill with our building systems advisory unit, and it's been growing just over a year and a half, and they're doing great.
And are you just doing this for, the example you gave me was, I assume, a vacant building, but
yes,
we're applying to buy and sell apartments that are not vacant, have one or two apartments vacant, but essentially a building that's filled with tenants. Do you do the sort of diligence for purchasers?
100%. So we're doing it for portfolios of apartment buildings. We're doing physical needs assessments. We're doing punch lists. For the first time, we were just asked to punch list someone else's building because our clients are so happy with the way that we're documenting these things. They had a building that someone else had designed. Go and punch list it for me. So I'm sending my engineers to punch list buildings. We're acting as owner reps on an acquisition for someone right now where the site is already being built. They don't want to remove the builder or the architect because it's already ongoing, but they want our eyes on the project. So we're getting signed up. So I made a joke about AI, but really it is a hedge against AI because there will be a time in the next couple of years where you tell the computer how many apartments you want on a floor and what the mix is, and it won't design the apartments, I don't think, not yet, but it'll pull from your bank of apartment designs and place them, right? So when buildings are much more quickly designed, I imagine they're going to have to be more economical when you sell it to the client, and we're going to need other streams of income. So we're getting to consulting in this way.
You'll just be one step ahead of the game, and that'll work.
Yeah, I think a lot of companies are doing it, but I think it's just another step in our evolution from being really an all-in-one real estate advisor in a sense, whether it's engineering, zoning, planning, construction.
Now you're just missing attorneys.
Oh, I've tried. I tried to hire an attorney once. She didn't want to cross the George Washington Bridge. No, my sister would never work for me.
She's like, I'm having too much fun.
She's too smart. Too smart.
Well, what else do you think that you have before we go? Is there something that you wanted to mention? Because I could probably talk to you an entire day because you have so many interesting
We have
stories.
work to do.
I understand.
Oh, that's why you want to cut this short. You have to go to work.
Seeing emails coming and I'm getting all anxious.
Brenda's, she's just nervous because she has to.
I turn my phone off. I can turn it off.
This is why you don't have to be nervous about all
I'll
the
be
emails
nervous.
you're
I'll
missing.
see when I turn it back on.
But let me say, it was absolutely lovely having you. We wanted to have you so long. We're so happy that you were able to join us. Even though I've worked on a ton of Aufgang projects, and so has Brenda, we've never actually met because you're off doing a lot of other things that you need to be doing. So you're not necessarily on the same projects.
Right.
Or we see each other face to face, but we've definitely crossed paths a number of times. Is there anything else? You have so many things to plug, but is there something that you want to plug? Your social media?
Well, everyone could follow us. We're on Instagram, it's _Aufgang. On LinkedIn, it's easy enough to find us. But what I want to plug is tax abatement. I want everyone to speak with their representatives and let's get a tax abatement for multifamily housing in New York City, right? We have to do it. We need an abatement. And without an abatement for multifamily housing, this crisis will get worse and worse and worse, and we're all just going to suffer from it. And it's not right. It's not. The people making the bad decisions are not the ones living on the street. So let's push them to make the right decisions, and let's get a new tax abatement to support multifamily housing in New York City.
Amen. Amen. And this is part of the things we want. I agree. And I would love to leave off on that note. Ari, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Well, everyone, that's our show. Thanks so much for listening.
And of course, don't forget to subscribe. Also, don't forget to leave comments, because we love to hear from our audience, right, Brenda?
Yeah, feel free to reach out at info@sideandshine.com or visit our website at sideandshine.com. We really look forward to hearing from you.
You could also reach out to David and Brenda at dshamshovich@sideandshine.com and bslakowski at sideandshine.com.
Those are lengthy last names. You can just find us on our website.
That's right.